because he's a very unusual emperor of the 16th century. And I grew up in India. And we have so many stories about Mughal Akbar. And I was fascinated with this person. So when I had to prepare a paper for this conference, I thought, why not explore Akbar? Especially my father had written his doctoral dissertation on the religious aspect of Akbar. So I thought I could cover two things. I can reread my father's dissertation and explore how Akbar became so popular in India. So that's the reason the paper is here. I'm not a scholar or researcher. This is my personal journey. So I wanted to give you that background. First, let me tell you a story. So this is like a fable. Once upon a time, there was a monarch of a large kingdom who ruled over a very religiously diverse population. The monarch was wise to recognize that to maintain stability and harmony, he had to be fair and equitable in dispensing justice, maintaining economic parity, and respecting their faiths. In fact, he took interest in these people's religions to understand what influenced their belief system and culture. He invited some wise representatives of these religions and had a dialogue with them. First, one-on-one, and then he fostered dialogue among these representatives. This monarch enjoyed listening to these dialogues and absorbed truths that satisfied his broad but discriminating worldview. He was also known to visit great saintly mystics incognito, because he was an emperor, so he had to go quietly to listen to these mystics and their messages and their spiritual chanting. He began incorporating some of these ideas and practices to broaden his spiritual practices, his own spiritual practices. Of course, leaders of his own religion did not like it. And it seemed that they dissuaded him from listening to the other people's religion. And of course, partly they felt that their own influence on the monarch was reduced. But his subjects began to appreciate this monarch and cooperated with him, and the peace reigned. In fact, when he died, people felt he was leaning toward their own faith and therefore died as one of them. So this is like a summary. And as you can probably guess, I'm talking about Akbar. I should give you a little background on what India was like when he came to power. I better stay to the notes. Emperor Akbar ruled large parts of India and Afghanistan from 1556 to 1605 AD. His firm but benevolent rule was in contrast to his predecessor Mughal emperors and other Muslim rulers. The Muslim rulers were known for their repressive and tyrannical rules, with imposition of Muslim Sharia law on predominantly non-Muslim subjects. They also destroyed many Buddhist and Hindu temples and built mosques on top of them. They also assessed a tax called jizya. This is a tax levied on non-Muslims. And knowing how popular pilgrimage was for the Hindus, they assessed tax, pilgrim tax. So these two taxes were very unpopular among the people in India. So they were subject to several hundred years of Muslim repressive, discriminating, resentful rule. And then comes Akbar. So you have to keep that in mind. The Mughal emperors before him, that is his father Humayun and grandfather Babur, were more moderate than the previous Muslim rulers who had come from Arabia and Turkey. Now, let me give you further background. Akbar's ancestors were Mongol rulers, such as Genghis Khan and Timur or Tamerlane. Akbar's grandfather Babur came to India via Persia and defeated Ibrahim Lodi, who was from Arabia. Now, the descendants of Timur were known to be ferocious fighters. As you know, that the Mongols took over large parts of Asia. They were known as ferocious fighters, but they were generally free of religious intolerance and bigotry, as opposed to people who came from Arabia and Turkey. They had, over the generations, switched between Shia and Sunni. That was another thing, so they were flexible. Babur was a Sunni, married to a Shia wife. Babur was his grandfather. And yet the couple had no problem. Babur's son Humayun married a Shia. And interestingly, Humayun built a city on the banks of river Jamna, named it Din Pana, means asylum of the faith. So Akbar's father and grandfather were very much interested in Sufism and wrote Sufi poetry. So in some way, Akbar had father and grandfather who were more tolerant. Now, Akbar's special affection was for Sufism. And let me make a remark which is not in the paper. Sufism came to India together with Islam. But Sufism grew in a different way in India, because Sufism that came from Mideast came in contact with Advaita Vedanta of Hinduism. And it is a monotheistic approach to spirituality. And so they kind of grew hand in hand. And so if you find Sufism in India, it's different than what you find in the Mideast. So Akbar he came in contact with Sufism of India. Akbar was a rare Muslim monarch to openly show interest in other faiths and not be intimidated by Muslim clerics who dissuaded him from the faiths of the Kafirs or infidels. From early on, he came to power when he was only 19. So naturally, there were people guiding him, including the mullahs and the imams. But from early on, he showed a curiosity and interest in religious discourses. First, it began with listening to Muslim scholars. So he invited Muslim scholars in his court. But he became disgusted when he found that these scholars could never agree with each other. And they began fighting on small little things. So then he invited other faiths, representatives from other faiths, and started listening to what their wisdom is saying. So he had people from Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Sufism. So he delighted in listening to the discussions among these representatives. He even built a special hall for this purpose called Ibadat Khana, which meant house of worship. If you go to India, to Fatehpur Sikri, you can see this Ibadat Khana. It's a beautiful hall, and that's where he reserved it for dialogue among representatives from these different religions. He also adopted the Sufi spiritual principle of Suli Kul. Suli Kul is the Arabic term which means universal peace and for the general good of all people. So that became his guiding principle during his rule. And his administrative policy was also guided by Suli Kul. Now he also realized that in many parts of his empire, the local Muslim judges were assisted by imams who were interpreting Sharia law. And often they interpreted in a very extreme way, and they meted out judgments against non-Muslims, which was very harsh. And he did not like that. So he declared himself the Khalifa of the age. Now, Khalifa is the very top person in Islam who has the ultimate authority of interpreting Quran. So generally Khalifa came in from Turkey, so the main Khalifa, but he took upon himself to be the Khalifa, and he told everybody that from now on he's the Khalifa of Afghanistan and India region, which meant that if he found the interpretation of Sharia was too harsh, then he would reinterpret for them. And given his Sufi background, he was more moderate. He sought out representatives from his empire who could articulate the finer points of their faith, and especially those who had imbibed it in their lives. In other words, he made sure that people who come to Ibadat Khana are broad-minded and willing to listen to other points of view. And if he found low tolerance, then he would kick them out. He had a remarkable openness and independent judgment on what features of a religion appealed to him, including those of Islam. He refused to accept that a single religion had all the answers for all the people. Now, if you put yourself in a Muslim ruler's shoes, that is an extreme position to take. It says no religion, one religion has answers to all the truths, including Islam. And he liked monotheism and didn't care for polytheism or idols. And perhaps his background in Islam was responsible for that. He did not care that much for mechanical, ritualistic approach to religion. However, he did some rituals daily, including worshiping the sun, because he felt sun was the source of all life. He enjoyed finding common themes among religions. He even attempted to create a universal faith called Deen-e-Ilahi. And that is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the paper here. In many ways, he was a theosophist interested in comparative study of religions. So let's talk about this faith, Deen-e-Ilahi, which means the divine faith. Actually, it was not a religion, but more a set of ethical beliefs and practices rather than a religion. Early on, he could tell that dogmas do not connect to each other. But if you talk about ethics and values, then many religions can talk to each other, just like the Theosophists, we believe that. He clearly saw a discord between many religious laws, creeds, and tenets. So he crafted a system of beliefs that could unify adherents of different religions, provided they were open-minded. Now, as far as we know, there were only 19 men in his inner circle of the court that were formally initiated in Deen-e-Ilahi, including his own crown prince, Jahangir. Perhaps it was never meant to catch on as a mass faith, but that the initiates could rather serve as role models. So the 19 people of his inner circle that were initiated in Deen-e-Ilahi were supposed to be role models and use this faith to guide their administrative roles. What are the components of Deen-e-Ilahi? So let me talk a few of them. The foremost is the fundamental principle of the faith was oneness of God and the importance of making our life God-centered. To help us do that, if any outer symbol was requested, then he felt the sun or the moon or fire may be used for adoration. Now we can just imagine where this came from. Fire. Zoroastrians and some of the Hindu practices have fire as their deity. And the sun and the moon come from different faiths. Akbar respected all religions and therefore considered it a cardinal principle of Deen-e-Ilahi. So he wanted to make sure that all his inner circle leaders believed in the respect for other religions. And this initiation made them follow the rule of universal peace in regards to respect for all religions. So these are two cardinal principles. Many other rules were promulgated for the initiates from time to time. Some of them look like do's and don'ts. Some of these promulgations were sent empire-wide, but their local leaders accepted according to their own wisdom. So he made an effort to make sure that his entire kingdom followed certain practices, but he knew that many of them were Muslim rulers and they were under the leadership of imams. So he could not force all of them to use all his promulgations. Now, some of the virtues that he wanted his members to cultivate was practice generosity and tolerance, refrain from bad actions and replace anger with gentleness, self-discipline in regard to worldly desires. So you can see as I read some of this, it came from different spiritual sources. Jainism, for example, the bond of worldly existence and worldly desires, that was again came from those religions. Freedom from the bond of worldly existence and accumulate merits for further existence. Now this idea of generating merits, that's very Buddhist and Hindu. And he felt that these need to be accumulated for for future. Reflect on the consequences of your actions and act with wisdom. Karma. So you believe in karma. Skillful discernment and judgment. That means before you act, skillful discernment and judgment. Develop strength in performing uplifting actions. Again, his leaders were asked to do that. Use soft voice, gentle words, and pleasant speech with everyone. This came from Jainism and Hinduism. No, Jainism and Buddhism. The wise speech is one of the eightfold paths. Cultivate a fellowship with others where one can sublimate one's ego. So in your relationship with other people, try to cultivate and sublimate one's ego. Detach from materialistic pursuits and earthly creature comforts in favor of perfect attachment to the Supreme Being. So what he was saying is, instead of being attached to worldly things, why not attach to the Supreme Being? He believed in purification of source by yearning after God and union with the merciful Lord. Now the last one is kind of interesting. Be content with least food. And we are told that he started reducing the amount of food he ate. Certainly comes from Jainism. Abstain from enjoyment of eating. After having this buffet today, it's kind of hard to read this. Abstain from enjoyment of eating, drinking, dress. And toward the end, he even says marriage is not that essential. Maintaining celibacy when possible. He had many, many wives, so for him, this is something. Maintaining celibacy when possible was also one of the virtues to be cultivated. Now, how are we doing time-wise? What I did was, okay, I looked at what Akbar's Deen Ilahi was and say, is there any other attempt in modern times that we can relate to? And I thought of the Declaration of Global Ethic in 1993 in Chicago. You know, in 1893 there was a Parliament of Religions in Chicago. 100 years later, they had 100th anniversary. And 200 scholars were given the responsibility of coming up with a common set of ethic that all religious representatives can buy into and sign it. That was a declaration of global ethic. So at that gathering in Chicago, several hundred people were signed on, and later on several thousand representatives from different religions were able to sign that declaration because it caught the core principles that all of us can agree on. And I've just summarized 4 major themes of that declaration. First one is commitment to a culture of nonviolence and respect for life. That was one of them. Now, Akbar was wise enough to realize that to maintain harmony and peace in his empire, it was smarter to choose diplomacy and bridge building over violence. So you can see even his Deen Ilahi had this aspect. Second aspect of the global ethic was commitment to a culture of solidarity and just economic order. This resembles Akbar's idea of removing discrimination in taxes and to foster financial parity among his various subjects. So in some way, what he did captured this principle also. And this in turn created a lot of goodwill among people and garnered support for his reign. The third principle of global ethic was commitment to a culture of tolerance and a life of truthfulness. Now, Akbar's Deen-e-Ilahi clearly emphasizes tolerance and respect for other faiths, as well as ethical behavior. In fact, one of the motivations for promulgating Deen-e-Ilahi was to create a culture of shared ethics and respect among people of different faiths. So Akbar also saw that in the same light. Fourth factor was commitment to a culture of equal rights and partnership between men and women. Interestingly, Akbar respected women, a fact that is borne out by his views and policy. One of the things he did was he removed child marriage, because he felt child marriage often created this disrespect for for women. He also believed in marriage to one woman. Now, he was a Muslim. He was allowed to marry 4 or more, but he said no, marrying one woman. And this came out of his respect for women. So let me conclude. Akbar was a unique Muslim monarch ahead of his times in fostering an interreligious dialogue among representatives of different faiths. So very rarely we find in history, especially a Muslim monarch that was broad-minded enough to cultivate this inter-spiritual dialogue. He also sought out mystics from different faiths to seek spiritual wisdom. He knew that the religious representatives were not necessarily living the faith, but the mystics were. So he went to the mystics of different religions to listen to their wisdom. He came to the conclusion that the different religions were indeed unified in certain core beliefs and ethics. He tried to formulate those core beliefs in Deen-e-Ilahi. And then he invited his close associates at the court to be initiated into Deen-e-Ilahi and to incorporate these principles into their life and administrative directives. That means he wanted them to be the role models in the empire. His hope was that as these principles became broadly known, people of goodwill would realize that indeed certain basic ethical principles cut across faiths. Akbar's personal ethical conduct and respect for different faiths earned him considerable goodwill that lasted through several hundred years. And even today, among all the Muslim monarchs that ruled India, Akbar is a different story. And children, and even in the newspaper, you have many, many stories about Akbar and how he ruled, how he was just, how he learned from these various mystical traditions. His quest for spiritual beliefs beyond Islam was not without risk. He took a considerable risk in going beyond Islam. And his kingdom was very large, and in certain parts of his kingdom, the local imams and mullahs fomented rebellion. So he had to contend with putting down those rebellions because he went outside the fold and made them believe that he was no longer following Islam. Overall, his reign was considered in India to be a model for even-handedness and respect for diversity. It ushered an era of Muslim-Hindu harmony. And I have to say that until the British came, his role model And his modeling created a Hindu-Muslim harmony, but then it got displaced by the British because they divided and conquered. I was very impressed with what Akbar had done, how much risk he took, how he went about learning the various wisdom. By the way, he was illiterate. He could not read any of these, just listen. So that also tells me the art of listening, and maybe imbibing the truths by listening may be an art we have forgotten, because we usually read, which comes through here, whereas listening probably goes a little more directly into our heart. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.